She hit the ground before she could scream a second time. Her own brother's hands pressed her down into the dirt, the same dirt her father had died on, the same land she had worked every sunrise since she was 9 years old. Nora Whitfield bit through her lip to keep from crying. She would not give them the satisfaction. She would not break. But her wrist was bleeding. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and Joseph's boot was on her back like she was livestock that had wandered where it didn't belong. She was 22 years old. This was supposed to be her home. If you're watching this for the first time, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop your city name in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now stay with me, because this one is going to take everything you've got. Wyoming Territory. October 1878. The wind off the high plains had turned mean 3 days ago and hadn't let up since. It came down from the Rockies with nothing to slow it, no trees, no hills, just open sage flats and the smell of coming snow. By the time it reached the Whitfield Ranch, it was the kind of cold that got inside your coat and stayed there. Nora had been living with that cold for 6 years. Not the weather kind. The kind that lives behind a man's eyes when he looks at you and sees something he owns. Her father, Thomas Whitfield, had built the ranch from nothing. 400 acres of Wyoming grassland, a herd worth real money, a house with glass windows, actual glass, not oilskin. He had been a hard man. Thomas Whitfield, but a fair one. He had taught Nora to read ledgers before she learned to read the Bible. He had let her ride fence lines with him and never once told her a girl had no business knowing the land. When he died consumption 2 winters back, she had genuinely believed, that she would step into the work he'd left behind. She had been wrong about that. Joseph Whitfield was 31 years old, the eldest, and he had ideas about how a ranch should run. His ideas did not include his sister. "You'll marry Holt Granger before the first snow," he told her 11 days before the night everything broke open. He didn't look up from the table when he said it. He was counting coins, stacking it in neat columns, and Nora understood in that moment that the conversation was already finished in his mind. She was a column, he was moving. Holt Granger was 53 years old. He had buried 2 wives and had a face like old saddle leather, and eyes that never quite focused on your face. They focused on something just past your shoulder, like he was already thinking about what he'd do with you once the papers were signed. "I won't," Nora said. Joseph looked up then, just briefly, just enough. "You will," he said, "or I'll see to it you've got nothing. No roof, no name, no claim to a single acre of what Papa built. Papa built it for all of us. Papa's dead." Joseph set down his coin. "I'm not." She had 3 brothers. Joseph the eldest, who ruled by weight and certainty. Daniel the middle, who watched everything from doorways and said little and drank more than was good for him. And Edward the youngest of the 3, who did whatever Joseph told him, because he had never in his 24 years developed a single opinion of his own. None of them had lifted a hand to her before that night. She wanted to be clear about that, not to excuse what they did, but because the truth mattered. Joseph had controlled her with words and property, with locked doors and ledgers kept out of her reach. He had been cruel the way a man is cruel when he's never had to answer to anyone systematically, casually, without heat. But 11 days after the marriage announcement, Nora found something that changed everything. She wasn't supposed to be in Joseph's study. She wasn't supposed to know where he kept the strong box key. She wasn't supposed to understand what the documents inside meant, but she did, because Thomas Whitfield had made sure she would, and Joseph had never thought to account for that. The papers were a land transfer deed. Properly filed, properly witnessed, except that her father's signature at the bottom had been written by someone else's hand. Nora knew her father's signature the way she knew her own heartbeat. She had watched him sign his name 10,000 times. The loop on the W. The way the F crossed itself. The ink always pressed harder at the start of a letter and lighter at the end. This signature pressed harder at the end. Someone had practiced it. Someone had gotten it almost right. But almost wasn't right, and Nora stood in the cold study with the lamp burning low and understood that her brother had forged their father's name to transfer 160 acres of eastern pasture, the best grazing land on the property, to Holt Granger. Before the wedding. Before she'd even agreed to the wedding. Holt Granger wasn't just buying a wife. He and Joseph were splitting the ranch between them. She was the mechanism, not the transaction, the mechanism. A signature on a marriage license that would make the whole thing legal. A woman who became property so that property could change hands. Nora stood very still for a long time. Then she folded the document, tucked it inside her dress against her skin, replaced the strong box exactly as she'd found it, and locked the study behind her. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. She thought about what she needed, and how long she had, and what would happen if she waited until morning. She decided she would not wait until morning. She was pulling on her second boot when the door opened. Joseph stood in the frame with a lamp in his hand and an expression on his face that she had never seen before. Not anger, not coldness, but something worse. Recognition. He already knew. She didn't know how a loose floorboard, a shadow under the door, some instinct that belonged to men who had spent their lives protecting what they'd taken, but he already knew. "Give it back," he said. "I don't know what you mean," she said. He was across the room in 4 steps. He grabbed her arm above the elbow, and his grip was not the grip of a brother. It was the grip of a man who has decided that patience is no longer required. "Joseph, give it back, Nora, right now, and we'll pretend this didn't happen. The way you pretended Papa's signature was real." The slap was not hard enough to knock her down, but it was hard enough to make her ears ring, and before she could get her balance back, he had her by both wrists and was calling out for Edward and Daniel, and the whole terrible machine of the Whitfield family was lurching into motion around her. Edward came first, half-dressed, confused. Then Daniel in the doorway with his boots unlaced and his eyes red from the whiskey. "She's been in the strong box," Joseph said. "Hold her." "Joseph, let's just—" Daniel started. "Hold her." Edward grabbed her other arm. Joseph's hand went to the front of her dress, searching, and Nora twisted and screamed not for help because there was no one to help her, but because her body refused to go quietly, even when her mind understood it was already over. The document came out. Joseph took it. He stepped back and straightened his shirt and looked at her like she was a problem that had been solved. "You're going to marry Holt Granger on Saturday," he said, "and you're never going to speak of this again." Nora looked at her 3 brothers, Joseph with his certainty, Edward with his blankness, Daniel with his eyes on the floor, and something happened inside her chest that she didn't have a word for. It wasn't rage exactly. It wasn't despair. It was something cleaner than both of those, something final. "No," she said. Joseph looked at her. "Get her on the floor," he said to Edward. "She needs to understand who she's talking to." What happened in the next 60 seconds, Nora would spend years trying not to think about too carefully. The floor came up to meet her. Joseph's voice above her flat and technical explaining consequences. Daniel's boots moving away from her toward the far wall. Edward's hands on her shoulders pressing not cruel, but not kind, just obedient. She bit Edward's hand hard enough to draw blood. He yelped and pulled back, and Nora came off the floor like a woman who had decided that dying on her feet was better than living on her knees. She ran for the window. She went through it. The drop to the ground was 8 feet, and she hit badly rolling wrong pain, shooting up her left ankle like a brand. She lay in the dead grass for 1 second, 1 single second, and then she heard Joseph's voice from above her, and she got up. She ran. Her ankle screamed at her. The cold hit her full in the face. The sage grabbed at her skirt and she yanked it free and kept running. No direction, no plan, just away. Away from the house. Away from the lamplight spilling out of her ruined window. Away from Joseph's voice calling after her with that horrible controlled patience. "You can't get far," he called. "There's nowhere to go, Nora. Come back inside." She did not come back inside. She ran until the house lights disappeared behind a low rise, and then she kept running, because stopping felt like dying, and somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd mile, her body found a rhythm that wasn't quite running and wasn't quite falling, but kept her moving forward through the dark. Her father's revolver. She remembered it when she was nearly a mile from the house, the old colt he kept in the barn, wrapped in oilcloth, hanging on a nail behind the tack room door. She'd put it there herself after he died because she couldn't stand to look at it in the house. She had gone back for it. Through the barn door, while the horses shifted and snorted, hands shaking so badly she nearly couldn't unwrap the cloth, and then she was running again, with the colt tucked in her waistband and 6 rounds loaded, and the cold sealing itself around her like a verdict. She had no coat. She had one boot on the wrong foot, she'd pulled it on too fast. She had her father's gun, and the clothes on her back, and blood from where the windowsill had caught her wrist, and that was everything. That was all she had. She ran until she couldn't run anymore, and then she walked, and the wind came down off the Rockies, and tried to take everything that was left of her, and she held on. Hike. Ethan Cole had been camped on the ridge above Sawyer Creek for 2 nights, which was longer than he usually stayed anywhere. He had no good reason to be in this part of Wyoming. He'd come up from Colorado following a rumor of ranch work near Casper. And the rumor had not panned out the way rumors generally didn't. And now he was camped on a ridge above a creek in the dark, with his horse picketed to a scrub pine, and a fire that he'd built smaller than he would have liked because he wasn't sure yet what kind of country this was or who might be watching it. He was 30 years old, and he'd been moving since he was 17, and he'd learned early that fires were promises they told people where you were and what you had and what you wanted, and the things he had and wanted were his own business. He heard the shot at 10:30. A single shot, distant from the direction of the Whitfield spread. He'd seen the lights from the ridge had marked the place as occupied and moved on the way you did. But a single shot at night was a specific kind of sound. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't a warning fired at a coyote. It had a weight to it, a desperation that didn't belong to a man who knew where he was going. He sat still and listened. Wind, creek water, his horse shifting her weight. Then, very faintly, a sound that wasn't the wind. He was saddled and moving before he'd made a decision about it, which was how most of his decisions got made. He found her near the creek bed in the shadow of a cut bank, sitting with her back against the earth and the revolver in her lap and her head down. For one terrible moment, he thought she was dead. Then she raised her head and looked at him, and her eyes were the clearest, hardest things he'd seen in a long time. She raised the gun. "Easy," he said. He kept his hands where she could see them. "I heard your shot." "I fired it into the air," she said. "I wasn't shooting at anyone." "I know." "Then why'd you come?" He thought about that for a moment. "Because a shot fired into the air at night usually means somebody wants to be heard," he said. "I figured I'd find out who." She looked at him. Really looked the kind of look that prices a man that counts his faults and his intentions and his capacity for trouble all in about 4 seconds. He let her do it. He'd learned not to move when a woman was measuring him. It generally went better. "You're not one of my brother's men," she said finally. "I don't know your brothers. You will if you stay near me." That a threat or a warning? Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile. "Both," she said. He swung down from the horse. She tensed, and the gun came up an inch, and he stopped where he was still 2 arms lengths away, and crouched down so he wasn't looming. "Your wrist is bleeding," he said. "I'm aware. You've got no coat. Also aware. Cold's going to get serious in an hour." "I know," she said, and her voice stayed level, but he heard something underneath it, not fear exactly, something more specific than fear. The sound of someone who has run the numbers and doesn't like the answer. "I'm Ethan Cole," he said. "I've got a camp up on the ridge. Fire blankets, some provisions. No strings on any of it. I don't know you." "No, ma'am, you don't." "You could be worse than what I'm running from." "Could be," he agreed. "But I'm not." She stared at him. He stared back. The wind moved between them. "How do I know that?" she asked. "You don't," he said. "Not for certain. But you're bleeding, and it's 30 degrees, and in about 40 minutes you're going to stop shaking, and that's when the trouble starts, because the cold's got you by then, and shaking is the only thing keeping you warm." He paused. You can keep the gun. I'm not going to ask you for it. A long silence. The creek ran below them, black and quick and cold. My name is Nora Whitfield, she said. My brothers are Joseph, Daniel, and Edward. Joseph will come after me. He'll come hard, and he won't stop. All right, Ethan said. I'm not asking you to fight them. I know. I just need... She stopped. He watched her jaw tighten, watched her refuse something pride maybe, or the word she didn't want to say. I need to be somewhere warm long enough to think, she finally said. I can manage that, he said. She put the gun in her waistband, not holstered, not put away, just moved to where she could reach it faster than he could, and she stood up and he saw her wince when the left ankle took her weight. He brought his horse alongside without being asked. She took the reins, not his hand, and pulled herself up. He walked. They went up the ridge in silence, the horse's breath steaming in the cold, the sage brushing their ankles. Ethan Cole walked beside the horse and watched the dark around them and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and he had long since stopped filling silence with noise. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. At the camp, he built the fire up and handed her a blanket, without looking at her directly, the way you offered things to animals that didn't yet trust you, without pressure, without expectation, just the thing held out and released. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat close to the fire and looked into it. After a while she said, He forged my father's name. Ethan said nothing. To a deed, she said. 160 acres. He was going to use my marriage to make it legal. She paused. I found the document. He took it back. Do you remember what it said? Every word she said. I have my father's head for numbers, and I read that document 3 times in the time I had. Ethan looked at her. Then it's not gone, he said. She looked at him. The document, he said. If you remember what it said, it's not gone. Something shifted in her face, very small, the way a door moves when someone on the other side reaches for the handle. She looked back into the fire. Above them, the first few flakes of snow began to fall quiet and indifferent, covering the tracks behind her. Joseph Whitfield was somewhere in the dark, and he would come. But tonight the fire held. The snow didn't stop falling. By the time Nora finally slept sitting upright back against the rock gun still in her right hand, there was a thin white layer across the camp that muffled everything. Ethan didn't sleep. He fed the fire in small increments the way you managed something precious, and he watched the dark beyond the ridge and listened. He heard nothing. That didn't mean nothing was there. He had spent enough years in enough territories to understand that silence was not safety. Silence was just the absence of sound, and the absence of sound meant nothing about the presence of men. Joseph Whitfield struck him as the kind of man who moved quietly when he was serious, and everything Nora had told him suggested Joseph Whitfield was always serious. She woke just before dawn. He knew the exact moment because her breathing changed the deep, helpless rhythm of exhausted sleep, giving way to something shallower, more controlled. She was pulling herself back before she was fully conscious. He recognized that. He'd done it himself for years after the war. You learned to surface fast because surfaces were safer than the deep places where your guard came down. You didn't sleep, she said. I'm fine. That wasn't a question. She looked at him. Her hair had come loose, and there was dried blood on her wrist, where the windowsill had caught her, and she looked like a woman who had been through something real. Not dramatic. Real. You've been watching the ridge. Habit, he said. Military habit or running habit. He looked at her. Both, he said. She accepted that with a small nod, the way she accepted most things without pushing, without softening. She stood and tested her weight on the left ankle, and he watched her jaw tighten when it complained, and then she walked on it anyway. I need to get to Casper, she said. That's 4 days' ride. I know how far Casper is. On foot with a bad ankle in early snow. I didn't say on foot. She looked at him. I said I need to get to Casper. I have a lawyer there, a man my father trusted before Joseph cut off contact with him. She paused. His name is Raymond Aldis. He handled my father's original land filings. If I can get to him, if I can reconstruct what was in that deed from memory, he might be able to file a challenge before Joseph completes the transfer." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You remember the deed?" "All of it. Numbers, parcel descriptions." "My father taught me to read land filings when I was 12, she said. "I read that document 3 times. I remember every word." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to take me. I'm telling you where I'm going. What you do with that is your business." He looked at her for a long moment. "My horse can carry double for 2 days, he said. "After that she'll need rest. We can probably pick up a second animal in Rollins." Nora looked at him the way she'd looked at him the night before pricing him, measuring, looking for the angle. "Why?" she asked. It was a fair question, and he didn't have a clean answer to it. He had no stake in her problem. He had no money invested, and no history with her family, and nothing to gain from 4 days hard riding into trouble that wasn't his. He could have ridden south at first light and been in Colorado before Joseph Whitfield finished his breakfast. "Because what your brother did is wrong," he said finally. "And because the right thing to do has a limited window sometimes, and I've learned that walking past that window is something you carry." She was quiet for a moment. "You're going to tell me you've walked past it before," she said. "I have." "And it bothered you?" "It still does." She looked at the fire, then she looked at him. "All right, Ethan Cole," she said. 4 days. They broke camp in less than 20 minutes. He was good at that, the quick disassembly of temporary things, and they were moving south before the sun fully cleared the horizon. She rode. He walked beside the horse and set a pace that was faster than comfortable and slower than reckless, and they didn't talk much in the first hour because the cold made conversation expensive, and they were both conserving what they had. It was Nora who broke the silence. "You said military habit," she said. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. 63rd Infantry, Union side." "How long?" 3 years. Mustered out in 65. "And since then?" "Moving," he said. "That's an answer that means you don't want to say." "It means since then I've been moving," he said. "Ranch work, some trail driving, a winter in Montana that I'd rather not repeat. Nothing that required staying." Nothing or no one. He glanced up at her. She was watching the country ahead, not looking at him when she asked it, and there was something careful in the question, not prying exactly. More like a woman who was trying to understand the shape of who she was trusting her life to. "Both," he said. "In that order." She nodded once slowly. Then, "Your family. Gone." 2 syllables. The kind of 2 syllables that meant the conversation about that particular subject was closed not out of anger, but out of the settled way a man closes a door on something he's already made his peace with, or tried to. Nora didn't push. She understood closed doors. They made 8 miles before noon and stopped at a frozen creek to let the horse drink and breathe. Nora climbed down and walked the ankle, and he watched her not limp, which took visible effort, and said nothing about it. "Joseph will have sent men by now," she said. "I figured. He'll send Edward first. Edward does what he's told." She broke a thin shelf of ice at the creek's edge so the water ran free. "Daniel is harder to predict. Joseph thinks Daniel follows orders too, but Daniel has a conscience that doesn't quite fit his life. He drinks because of the distance between the two. You know your brothers. I grew up studying them," she said. "When you're the only woman in a house full of men who have opinions about what you should be, you learn to read them fast." She looked up at the gray sky. "Edward will track hard and fast. If we can stay ahead of him until Rollins, we can lose him in town. And if Joseph comes himself." She was quiet for a moment. "Joseph won't stop," she said. "Not for law, not for reason, not for anything I say to him. The only thing that will stop Joseph is a legal document that makes the land transfer worthless." She looked at Ethan. "Which is why Raymond Aldis matters. Which is why Casper matters." "Then we stay ahead of Edward," he said. "Yes. And we ride faster. The look she gave him was almost something. Not gratitude, she wasn't there yet, and he understood that and respected it. Something closer to recognition. Like she'd said something with a locked door, and he'd walked around the side of it without asking for the key. They were back in the saddle, her on the horse, and him on foot, when the sound came behind them, north muffled by the snow, but unmistakable. Hooves. More than one horse. Moving with purpose. Nora heard it at the same moment he did. He felt her stillness without looking. The horse felt it too, the mare's ears going sharp and forward. "How far?" she said quietly. "Half-mile, maybe less." He kept his voice flat. "They're moving faster than we did." "Edward." "Probably." "We can't outrun them," she said. "Not with one horse carrying double." He was already looking at the terrain, not for escape, for geometry. He'd learned in the war that geometry was everything. The angle of approach, the position of cover, the difference between being seen and being found. "There's a cut in the ridge to the east," he said. "Narrow. Rocks on both sides." "I know it," she said. "Scar Canyon. It's tight, but it opens south toward the Rattlesnake Hills." "One at a time through there," he said. "They'd have to slow down, string out, or they could wait us out at the south end." "Only if they know where we're going," he said. "Do they?" She thought for 1 second. "No," she said. "Joseph knows I have a connection to Aldous and Casper, but Edward doesn't know that. Joseph wouldn't tell Edward more than he needed to." "Then we go east," Ethan said. "Right now." She turned the horse without another word, and he caught the stirrup and pulled himself up behind her, and the mare lurched forward into a run that she maintained for longer than she should have been asked to, because horses always knew when it was serious, and this mare knew. The sound behind them grew, and then plateaued, and then slowly faded as the canyon walls closed in on either side, and the light went cold and narrow, and the hoofbeats of their pursuers softened against the wind. They were through to the other side 40 minutes later. He climbed down immediately and walked alongside again, and the horse dropped back to a walk that was half stumble, breathing hard, and Nora leaned forward and said something quiet to the animal that he didn't hear and didn't need to. "We've got maybe 2 hours before she needs to stop," he said. "I know. And they're going to figure out where we went." "I know that too. I'm not telling you things you don't know," he said. "I'm thinking out loud." She glanced down at him. "Then think out loud about Rollins," she said. "Because that's where we need to be by tomorrow morning." He thought about Rollins. He'd been through it twice, neither time for long. Railroad town, rough edges, the kind of place that minded its own business because everyone in it had reasons to prefer that. Livery stable on the south end. A hotel that asked no questions. A telegraph office. "Rollins," he said. "We can get a second horse. Resupply. Telegraph ahead to Aldous so he knows you're coming." "Can we trust the telegraph operator?" "We don't tell him anything worth knowing," Ethan said. "Just that a Miss Whitfield is arriving in Casper on business and requests a meeting at his earliest convenience." "That's enough. Raymond will understand." "You're certain he'll help you?" It wasn't a question exactly. More of a pressure point, the kind you pressed to find out if something was solid before you put weight on it. She was quiet for a moment. "My father saved Raymond Aldis's life in 1869, she said. "A land dispute that went sideways. The other man had a gun, and my father stepped between them." She paused. "Raymond has never forgotten it. He's written to me privately 3 times since Joseph cut contact. He's been waiting for me to ask." "All right," Ethan said. "All right." They made another 4 miles before the mare truly needed rest. They stopped in a shallow draw out of the wind, and he unsaddled her and rubbed her down with his bedroll blanket, while Nora sat on a flat rock and ate the last of the dried beef from his pack without being asked to eat, and without apologizing for eating it, which he appreciated. There was something deeply practical about her. She didn't perform helplessness, and she didn't perform toughness either. She just was what she was, and what she was kept adjusting to circumstances with the kind of quiet competence that most people spent their whole lives not developing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "Why didn't you go south this morning before I woke up?" She looked at him. You could have. Your horse, your supplies. I was asleep. You had no obligation. He kept working the blanket across the mare's flank. I told you why. You told me the philosophical answer, she said. I'm asking for the real one. He stopped. He looked at her. He thought about it. Because you didn't ask me to stay, he said. You didn't cry. You didn't beg. You sat by that fire and you told me the facts of your situation the way a man would have told them, straight and without decoration, and you made it clear you weren't looking for rescue. He paused. I've seen a lot of people who needed help. Most of them wanted someone to fix it for them. You wanted a fighting chance. That's different. Another pause. I wanted to see if you'd get one. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her boots. That's still a philosophical answer, she said, but something in her voice had changed. Very slightly. The door hadn't opened, but she'd noticed the space beside it. They camped in the draw that night. He built a small fire, smaller than he wanted, larger than was strictly safe, and she sat across it from him, and they ate what there was and said little. And at some point in the dark she said, Daniel won't hurt me. He looked up. I want you to know that, she said. If it comes to it, if we see him, Daniel won't raise a hand to me. He never has. She paused. He didn't last night either. He walked to the wall. He held you down, Ethan said. He was there when it happened, she said. That's not the same thing. It is in some ways. I know, she said. But it means there's something left in him worth reaching. I don't want you to. If it comes to a confrontation, I don't want Daniel treated the same as Joseph. He's not the same. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's your call to make, he said. Not mine. I know it is, she said. I'm just telling you in advance, so there's no confusion in the moment. He nodded. He understood the need for that, the prearrangement of things that needed to be clear before chaos made clarity impossible. He'd done the same thing before engagements in the war. You said the things that needed saying while there was still time to say them. Noted, he said. Thank you. 3 words. Quietly spoken. Addressed to the fire as much as to him. But he heard the weight in them, not just gratitude for the acknowledgement, but something accumulated from the night before, from this morning, from the canyon and the hours of walking and the dried beef she hadn't been too proud to eat. He didn't say you're welcome. It felt like it would have diminished something. He said, get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. She slept. This time without the gun in her hand. It was still in her waistband, still close, but her hand was free. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He fed the fire and watched the dark. Before sunrise, he heard the sound he'd been waiting for. Not the loose, searching sound of men who weren't sure where they were going. The focused, direct sound of men who had figured it out. He was already moving when Nora's eyes opened. They found the canyon route, he said. She was on her feet in 2 seconds. How many? 2 horses, coming from the northeast. Edward and one of the ranch hands. She was already rolling her blanket. Joseph. Not with them, different weight, different pace. She stopped, looked at him. You can tell that from hoofbeats. From the way they're moving, he said. Joseph moves like a man who has all the time in the world because he's decided the outcome already. These 2 are moving like men who are following orders and hoping to get it done before breakfast. She almost laughed. Almost. Then let's not make it easy for them, she said. They were moving in 4 minutes. Not running, the mare wasn't ready to run, and running in the pre-dawn on uncertain ground was a fast way to lose a horse and end the journey. But moving steady and deliberate south and west, toward Rollins, toward Raymond Aldous, toward the legal mechanism that was the only real weapon she had. Behind them, the hoofbeats grew. Closer. Faster. And then a voice cut across the cold morning air, young and strained, and carrying something more than authority. Carrying something close to fear. Nora, stop. It's Edward. Nobody's going to hurt you. Just stop. She didn't stop. She leaned forward on the horse, and she didn't look back, and Ethan Cole walked faster beside her, with his hand near his coat, where the Remington sat. And Edward Whitfield's voice rose behind them, young and desperate, and cracking just slightly at the edges. The voice of a man who had never once in his life had to consider what would happen if the person he was chasing refused to be caught. "Nora, please." The mare found another gear without being asked. The voice faded, and Nora Whitfield rode south through the pale and lightening morning with her jaw set and her eyes forward, and she did not look back, and she did not slow down, and somewhere in the hour that followed, when the sounds of pursuit had gone quiet and the road ahead opened into something wider and more possible, Ethan watched her shoulders drop exactly 1 inch, the smallest and most honest form of relief he had ever witnessed. He said nothing. Sometimes there was nothing to say. The road to Rawlins was 30 miles, and they had most of a day to cover it, and behind them the snow was still falling, covering tracks, and ahead of them the distance between Nora Whitfield and the life that wasn't hers kept growing 1 mile at a time, 1 step at a time, the way all real distances get covered. Not by running, by refusing to stop. Rawlins was the kind of town that didn't ask questions because everyone in it had answers they didn't want to give. They rode in just past noon, the mare walking on pride more than energy by that point, and Nora's ankle had swollen enough inside her boot that she felt every stride the animal took. She didn't mention it. Ethan noticed anyway. He noticed most things without making a production of it, but he said nothing, which she was beginning to understand was his particular form of respect. The livery stable was on the south end, run by a heavy-set man named Cutter, who had the eyes of someone who had seen everything and retained the information carefully. He looked at Nora's torn dress and her bloodied wrist and the gun in her waistband, and then he looked at Ethan, and then he went back to looking at the horse. "She needs a full day," he said about the mare. "We need her ready by tomorrow morning," Ethan said. "I said what she needs. And I said what we need. Can you have a second horse ready tonight? Something with legs." Cutter looked at them both for a long moment. He had the expression of a man performing a calculation. $60, he said. "Mare's board included." "40, Ethan said. "And we're not here." Another pause. Longer this time. "45, Cutter said. "And I haven't seen either one of you." Done. Ethan paid from a worn leather pouch that Nora had not known he carried, and she filed that away without comment. A man who kept cash hidden was a man who had learned to be ready to move. She understood that kind of readiness. She was developing it herself in real time. The hotel was 2 streets over. $3 a night, run by a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Harlan, who had a face like weathered timber and a disposition to match. She looked at Nora the same way Cutter had looked at the mare, assessing soundness, estimating cost. "1 room or 2, she said. "2, Nora said before Ethan could answer. Mrs. Harlan's expression didn't change. She handed over 2 keys. "Supper's at 6. Breakfast at 5:30. "We'll need hot water," Nora said. "And if you have a needle and thread." "I'll send Della up," Mrs. Harlan said. And that was the end of that. The room was small and cold, and the most private space Nora had occupied in 3 days, and she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the ankle for the first time without an audience. It was bad. Not broken, she'd broken a finger once, and knew the specific language of broken things, but badly sprained, swollen tight against the leather, and when she finally worked the boot off, she had to press her lips together hard to keep the sound inside. A knock at the door. A girl of about 16 with a bucket of steaming water, a cloth, and a small sewing kit. "Mrs. Harlan says to wrap the ankle tight," the girl said. "She says if you soak it first, it'll hurt less when you do." "Mrs. Harlan's seen this before," Nora said. "Mrs. Harlan's seen everything," the girl said and left. Nora soaked the ankle. She wrapped it. She cleaned the cut on her wrist and sewed her dress where the shoulder seam had torn 3 stitches tight and even. And she looked at her hands afterward, steady both of them, which surprised her, and also didn't. Then she sat and thought about Raymond Aldous. She had sent the telegram from the office on Main Street before coming to the hotel. Ethan standing outside with his back to the door, not guarding exactly, just present in the particular way he was present, like furniture that could move fast if it needed to. The telegram had been 7 words. Whitfield's daughter. Coming to Casper. Urgent matter. Raymond would understand. He was a careful man, methodical, the kind of lawyer who read documents 4 times before he signed anything. He had been her father's friend before he was his attorney, and the distinction mattered. Friends did things that attorneys couldn't. What she needed him to do was not precisely within the boundaries of what attorneys did. She was still working through the specifics of it when the knock came, 2 short, 1 long, the pattern Ethan had suggested before they parted ways in the hall. She opened the door. He had cleaned up or done what was possible with cold water and limited options. He looked the same in most ways that mattered, but his jaw was shaved clean, and there was something slightly different in the way he held himself, not relaxed exactly, but offline from the constant alert of the road. "Telegraph office had a return message," he said. Her chest tightened. "Already." Aldous must have been in his office. He held out the slip. "I had them read it to me." She took it. The words were careful and deliberately bland, the words of a man who knew telegrams were not private. "Expected Thursday. Office prepared. Bring everything you remember. R.A." She read it twice. "He'll do it?" "Seems so." He said, "Bring everything I remember." She looked up. "He already knows what I have. He's telling me that my memory is enough to work with." "Is it?" "I told you. I read that deed 3 times. She folded the telegram. "I can reconstruct every material term. Parcel number, legal description, the names of the witnesses Joseph used. I know one of them, a man named Cutler, who works the eastern fence line. If Aldous can locate Cutler and put him under oath—" She stopped. "Cutler doesn't know what he witnessed. Joseph wouldn't have told him. He would have just handed him a pen and told him to sign." "A man who signed something he didn't read," Ethan said. "That's a different kind of guilty." "That's the kind Aldous can use," she said. "A coerced or uninformed witness gives the whole document a different legal character. It becomes fraud in the execution, not just the content." She paused. "I know that because my father used to say that the most dangerous forgeries were the ones with real witnesses." Ethan was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not surprise exactly. Something more like recalibration, like a man adjusting his estimate of a distance he'd badly underestimated. "You've been building this case in your head since last night," he said. "Since the moment Joseph took the document," she said. "I knew it was gone, so I started building what I still had." He was quiet for a moment. "He underestimated you," he said. "Everyone does," she said, not bitterly, just as a fact the way you state weather. Something moved across his face, quick and controlled, but she caught it. She'd gotten good at catching the things Ethan Cole didn't intend to show. "What?" she said. "Nothing." It wasn't nothing. He looked at her for a moment. "I did too," he said. "When I first rode down to the creek, I saw a woman in the dark with a gun she didn't know how to use, and I thought, 'I know how to use it,'" she said. "I know that now." "Did you see me fire it wrong at any point?" "You fired it into the air." "Because I needed to be heard not to hit anything." She held his gaze. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 14. I have hit everything I've aimed at since I was 16. He looked at her. "All right," he said quietly. "I apologize." She had not expected that. An apology, straight and undecorated, offered without qualification or excuse. She had expected defense, or at minimum the kind of backpedaling that men did when they'd said something they couldn't quite take back. Not this. "Accepted," she said. He nodded once. He moved to leave. "Ethan." He stopped. "I don't actually know how far 2 days' ride is going to get us," she said. "If Joseph sends men to Casper, if he telegraphs ahead to someone tries to intercept Aldous—" "Has he got someone in Casper?" "I don't know. He might." She pressed her lips together. He has a relationship with a man named Tolliver, land broker. I don't know if Tolliver has Casper connections, but I don't know that he doesn't. Tolliver, Ethan said. Thomas Tolliver out of Cheyenne. She looked at him sharply. You know him. I know of him, Ethan said. Met a man in Colorado last year who'd done business with him. Said Tolliver had a habit of acquiring land that other people were still technically on. Her stomach turned. That's consistent. If Tolliver's connected to this deal, it's not just your brother's scheme, Ethan said slowly. Tolliver runs bigger operations. The forged deed, the marriage, the land transfer that could be the front end of a larger acquisition. The room was very quiet. How much larger? She said. That I can't tell you, he said. But it's worth asking Aldous about. A man like Tolliver doesn't involve himself in a single ranch for sentimental reasons. Nora sat very still and rearranged what she knew. The pieces she'd been carrying, Joseph's cruelty, the forged deed, the forced marriage had felt personal. The specific violence of a specific man who wanted specific things. But if Tolliver was in it, if this was a pattern, a methodology, a system that had eaten other ranches before hers, my father's eastern pasture, she said. The 160 acres in the deed. What about it? It borders the old Haverstock claim to the east. The Haverstock family sold 2 years ago, moved to Oregon. She looked up at him. I thought it was personal circumstance. Hard season older couple. Who bought the Haverstock claim? She knew the answer before she finished the thought. She knew it the way you know something you've been not thinking about for 2 years because the thinking is too heavy. A land-holding company out of Cheyenne, she said quietly. I never knew the name of it. Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. He's been building toward us, she said. Tolliver. Or whoever is behind this. The Haverstock land. And now ours, and the marriage was the mechanism to make it. She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on her knee. It was never about Joseph controlling me. Joseph was just the instrument, Ethan said. Yes. Her voice was level, but something underneath it was not. My brother sold me to a scheme he probably doesn't even fully understand. He thought he was getting half a ranch. He might have signed away something much larger. She stood up. The ankle protested and she ignored it. We have to get to Aldous before anyone knows what we know, she said. Not just about the deed. About Tolliver. About the Haverstock connection. If Aldous can pull the filing records for that sale. One thing at a time, Ethan said. There isn't time for one thing at a time. Nora. His voice was quiet, not commanding, grounding. You've been running on fear and adrenaline for 2 days. You need to eat and sleep and let that ankle rest because tomorrow is going to require you to function at full capacity, and right now you're running on empty. He paused. The information you have isn't going anywhere. It's in your head. No one can take it. Sleep on it. Let it settle. You'll think clearer in the morning. She wanted to argue. She had the argument ready, fully formed, the way she always had arguments ready. But she looked at him, at the steadiness of him, the uncomplicated practicality of what he was saying, and the argument lost momentum somewhere in the middle. I hate that you're right, she said. I know, he said. And there was something in the way he said it. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement. Something warmer and more careful than either, that she filed away without quite examining it. He left. She ate supper alone in her room because going down to the dining room meant being seen, and being seen in Rollins was a risk she didn't want to take. Mrs. Harlan sent up a plate without being asked. Beans, salt pork, cornbread, and Nora ate every bite with the methodical thoroughness of someone fueling a machine. She was nearly asleep when the noise began downstairs. Voices. Loud male, the particular volume of men who want to be heard. She was at the door, in Second's ear, against the wood. A new voice, young, familiar. Edward. Edward Whitfield's voice carrying up through the floorboards, doing the thing Edward always did when he was scared, and performing confidence, talking too fast and too loud, and saying things that were more Joseph's words than his own. Young woman traveling with a man, dark horse arrived this afternoon. I'm her brother, and I've been sent to bring her home safely. Mrs. Harlan's voice, flat as a board. Don't have any young women here fitting that description. Ma'am, I have reason to believe. I said what I said. A pause. Nora pressed closer to the door. I can make it worth your time, Edward said. Financially. Another pause. Longer. Then Mrs. Harlan said, Young man, I have been running this hotel since before you were born, and in that time I have learned to recognize two types of men, the kind who come to collect a debt and the kind who come to collect a person. I don't help either kind. A brief silence. Now get out of my dining room. Nora heard boots on floorboards. The front door. Quiet. She waited 3 full minutes before she moved to the window and looked down at the street. Edward was standing outside with another man ranch hand. She recognized him, one of Joseph's newer hires, and they were talking in low voices. Edward looked up at the hotel, and she stepped back from the glass. He'd found them faster than she'd expected. She was pulling on her boot, the left one wincing through the swollen ankle when the too short, one long knock came. She had the Colt in her hand before she reached the door. Ethan. He'd heard it too. He's outside, she said. I know. There's an alley exit through the kitchen. Mrs. Harlan, she covered for us. I know that too. Something moved through his expression, not surprise. More like women in these positions having specific solidarity with each other, noted respected. We can leave now or wait for him to move on. Moving now loses us the rest and the horse. If we wait, she said, Joseph could get here. Edward rode hard to beat us here. Joseph doesn't know where we are yet, or he'd have come himself. Ethan paused. Edward is going to watch the hotel tonight. But Edward alone I can manage. She looked at him. I don't want you to hurt him. I know. I know Nora. His voice was steady. I'll manage it. She believed him. That was the thing she kept returning to. She believed him, and she didn't believe people easily, and she couldn't fully explain why this man with 2 syllables for his past and a history of not staying was the one she trusted. Maybe because he'd never once pretended to be more than he was. Maybe because every promise he'd made so far had been small and specific, and he'd kept all of them. We wait until 2 in the morning, she said. Then we go. All right. He started to leave. Ethan. The 3rd time she'd called him back. She was starting to notice the pattern. When this is over, when Aldous files whatever he files, and the deed is challenged and the law is involved, what happens to Joseph? He turned. What do you want to happen? I want him to answer for it, she said. Not destroyed, but answerable. I want the law to make him answerable. Land fraud carries real weight in Wyoming, Ethan said. If Aldous can tie Tolliver to it, it carries even more. And Daniel's a witness, he said. A reluctant one, but a witness. That's different from a perpetrator. She nodded slowly. Then, and Edward. Edward, Ethan said, is a young man who did what his older brother told him because he never learned to do anything else. The law will see it that way if Aldous presents it right. A pause. They're your brothers, Nora. The shape of their consequences is something you get to have a say in. She hadn't known she needed to hear that. She hadn't known that the thing underneath the case, underneath the deed and the fraud and the flight, the thing at the bottom of all of it was this, the terror that justice would come like a flood, and not distinguish between the men who deserved it and the one who just hadn't been brave enough to say no. Thank you, she said. He nodded. At 2 in the morning, Mrs. Harlan unlocked the kitchen door without a word, handed Ethan a wrapped package that turned out to be cornbread and salt pork for the road, and watched them slip out into the alley with the expression of a woman who had made this calculation before and was comfortable with the answer she kept getting. The second horse was a roan gelding taller than the mare with the kind of ground-eating stride that covered distance efficiently. Cutter had him saddled and ready in the dark of the livery without being asked, which meant Ethan had arranged it earlier, which meant Ethan had been thinking 3 steps ahead all day. She rode her own horse for the first time since the night of the window. It felt different, having her own animal, her own reins, her own pace. She had not realized until this moment how much she had chafed against the dependency, not against Ethan, who had earned every inch of the trust she'd placed in him, but against the state of needing, against being the one who required assistance instead of the one who provided it. She rode beside him, not behind, and the road opened south, and the stars were clear and cold overhead, and somewhere behind them, Edward Whitfield was watching a hotel that was already empty. They were 20 miles out of Rawlins when dawn broke, and it was in that pale cold light with Casper still 2 hard days ahead of them, and Joseph Whitfield somewhere behind them, connecting pieces. She hoped he hadn't connected yet, that Nora reached into the front of her dress and produced a folded piece of paper. Ethan looked at it. "The deed," she said. "I wrote it out last night, from memory. Every word, every number, every name." She held it toward him. "Before I slept, in case something happened to me before we got to Aldous." He took it. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You said the document was gone," he said. "The original is," she said. "This is everything I carried in my head. Parcel number, legal description, both, witness names, the date, the notary seal language. I can't reproduce the physical document, but I can reproduce its content with enough accuracy that a lawyer who knows land filings can work with it." He looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and handed it back. "Keep it on you," he said. "I intend to." Another silence, but a different kind than before. Not the silence of strangers managing proximity. Something else. Something that had been building since the creek bed where she'd pointed a gun at him, and he'd crouched down so he wasn't looming since the fire where he'd said the document isn't gone since the canyon where he'd picked the geometry without hesitating. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah, when this is over." She kept her eyes on the road. "Where do you go?" A long pause. "I don't know yet," he said. "You said you've been moving since '65. "I have. 13 years, she said. "That's a long time to keep moving." "It is," he said. "What are you looking for?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I used to think I was looking for something specific. A place. A kind of work." He paused. "I've started to think I was looking for a reason to stop." She felt that land somewhere in her chest. She didn't look at him. "Did you find one?" she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't say no. The roan gelding found his stride beside the mare, and together they moved south through the cold, clear morning. 2 days from Casper, 2 days from Raymond Aldous, and land records and the legal architecture of justice. And somewhere far behind them, a man named Joseph Whitfield was finally beginning to understand that the thing he thought he owned had already gotten away. They rode into Casper on the 3rd day, not the 2nd. The roan gelding had thrown a shoe 12 miles out, and the delay cost them 4 hours. 4 hours of Ethan working the animal carefully on soft ground, while Nora walked beside them and said nothing about the ankle which had stiffened badly overnight and was making itself known with every step. She had wrapped it tighter that morning and laced the boot over it and decided not to think about it, which was the same decision she'd been making about a number of things over the past 3 days. The farrier in a small settlement called Bison Creek charged them $3 and worked fast, and they were moving again by mid-afternoon. But the delay meant arriving in Casper as the light was going gray, and the businesses were closing up, and Raymond Aldous's office on Front Street had its lamp turned low. He was still there. She knew he would be. The telegram had said Thursday, and it was Thursday, and Raymond Aldous was the kind of man who said what he meant, and meant what he said, which was rarer than it should have been, and was precisely why her father had trusted him. He opened the door before they knocked. Raymond Aldous was 61 years old, small and precise, with white hair and the kind of eyes that processed information quickly and quietly behind wire-framed spectacles. He looked at Nora, at her torn dress, her wrapped wrist, the way she was carrying her left side, and his expression did something brief and painful that he controlled before it became visible. Almost before. "Nora," he said, Come inside. He looked at Ethan. This is Ethan Cole, Nora said. He's the reason I'm standing here. Aldous extended his hand. Then I'm in your debt, Mr. Cole. You're not, Ethan said. She did the hard part. Aldous let them in. He locked the door behind them, which told Nora he'd already been thinking about risk, and he gestured them to chairs across from his desk and poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher without asking if they wanted any. Which was the small practical hospitality of a man who understood that people arriving from a hard journey needed water before they needed words. Nora drank. Ethan drank. Aldous sat. Tell me everything, Aldous said. Leave nothing out. She told him. All of it, the marriage announcement, the strong box, the forged deed, the flight through the window, the canyon, and Rollins and Edwards' voice rising through the hotel floorboards. She told him about Tolliver, about the Haverstock claim, about the land-holding company out of Cheyenne, whose name she had never known. She laid it out in sequence, clean and precise, the way her father had taught her to present information, most important facts first, supporting details, in order nothing omitted, nothing embellished. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Aldous had written nothing down during the telling. He had sat with his hands folded on the desk and listened with the complete stillness of a man who took notes in his head and trusted the transcription. The deed, he said. You wrote out the material terms. She produced the folded paper. He read it. He read it again. His expression changed once, a small tightening around the eyes, and then settled back into professional neutrality. The parcel number is correct, he said. I filed your father's original land claim myself. I know this parcel. He set the paper down. The witness names. Cutler first name. Walt, Nora said. Walt Cutler. He's worked the eastern fence line for the Whitfield Ranch for 4 years. Aldous nodded slowly. The second witness. Harmon. I don't know a Harmon, she said. I've never seen that name on the ranch payroll. Joseph may have brought him in specifically for this. A convenience witness, Aldous said. Hired for the occasion, possibly paid to disappear afterward. He picked up the paper again. The notary seal language you reproduced, do you know the name of the notary? It wasn't a name I recognized. G.W. Pemberton. Aldous went still. Not the stillness of thought, the stillness of recognition. You know that name, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. Aldous looked at him, then back at Nora. G.W. Pemberton, he said carefully, is not a licensed notary in the state of Wyoming. I know every licensed notary in this jurisdiction. There is no G.W. Pemberton. The room absorbed that. A fabricated seal, Nora said, which means the document fails on its face, Aldous said. Before the forged signature, before the uninformed witness, before Tolliver, the notarization itself is fraudulent, and a fraudulent notarization voids the legal force of any deed, regardless of whether the underlying signature is genuine. He looked at her. Your brother didn't just forge your father's name, Nora. He built his fraud on a false foundation, and I can see it clearly because you remembered every word of that document. Nora felt something give way in her chest. Not collapse release, the difference between a wall falling and a door finally opening. How long to file a challenge, she said. I can have a petition before the Territorial Land Office by Monday morning, Aldous said. But there's something more important than the petition. He leaned forward. If Tolliver is connected to this, if this is part of a larger acquisition pattern, I need to file simultaneously with the U.S. Land Commissioner's Office in Cheyenne. Land fraud at that scale is a federal matter. It changes the nature of what we're dealing with entirely. How do we prove the Tolliver connection? Ethan asked. Carefully, Aldous said, and quickly. He looked at Nora. Do you know if your father kept copies of his original land filing documents at the ranch? In his study, she said. In the same strong box Joseph used for the deed. There's a tin folder behind the false bottom. Papa showed me when I was 16. He said, she stopped for a second. He said a woman who knew where the important papers were kept was a woman who couldn't be left with nothing. Aldous was quiet for a moment. Your father was a wise man, he said. He was, she said. Those original filings combined with what you've given me and whatever I can pull from the Haverstock sale records will be enough to build the federal case. He looked at both of them. But someone needs to go back to that ranch and get that tin folder before Joseph finds it or destroys it. The words sat in the air. Nora felt Ethan go still beside her. Not tense, just present in a different way, the way he got when the geometry of a situation was becoming clear. "He'll be there," Nora said. "Yes," Aldous said. "He knows I went somewhere. He knows I have something. He'll be watching the study." "Almost certainly." She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. "I'll go," he said. "I'm going too," she said. "Nora, those are my father's papers," she said, "in my father's house. I know where the false bottom releases. I know which floorboard creaks and which ones don't. I know the lock on the study window, and I know Joseph's patterns, and I know that ranch better than any man in Wyoming." She held his gaze. "You need me." He knew she was right. She could see him knowing it, which was one of the things about Ethan Cole that distinguished him from men who also knew things. He didn't argue against facts to protect his pride. "We go in at night," he said. "Same as before." "Same as before?" she agreed. Aldous looked between them. "There's something else you should know," he said, and his voice had shifted into a register that made both of them focus sharply. "I received a visitor this afternoon. Before your telegram arrived, a man came to my office asking about Whitfield land holdings. He was well dressed, spoke carefully. He gave his name as Harold Voss and said he represented a land development interest and wanted to know the status of certain parcels adjacent to the Haverstock claim." Nora felt the cold again, not the weather kind. "Tolliver sent someone," Ethan said. "Tolliver sent someone to a lawyer whose connection to the Whitfield family he presumably discovered through Joseph," Aldous said. "Which means Joseph told Tolliver about me, which means Joseph told Tolliver about Nora." "He's trying to find out how exposed he is," Nora said. "Or he's trying to intercept the process before it starts," Aldous said. "What concerns me is the timing. This man Voss arrived before I received your telegram, but only by an hour. Either Joseph sent word to Tolliver very quickly after realizing you'd fled, or Tolliver has his own sources of information," Ethan said. Aldous nodded. "The telegraph office," he said. "I wouldn't trust it anymore. Your 7-word message was innocuous, but if someone is watching my communications, then they know I'm in Casper," Nora said. "Yes. And they know you're preparing to file something. They may suspect it." The three of them sat with that for a moment. "How long until Voss reports back?" Ethan asked. "He left 2 hours ago," Aldous said. "If he telegraphed immediately, Tolliver knows by now. If Joseph is with Tolliver or in contact—" "Joseph could be riding for Casper tonight," Nora said. "Or he's already riding for the ranch to destroy the documents," Ethan said. They looked at each other. 2 problems, 1 night, 2 people, and approximately 1 good ankle between them. "Split it," Ethan said. "I ride for the ranch. You stay with Aldous and start building the filing. You don't need to be at the ranch for the papers you need to tell me exactly how to find the false bottom, and I go in, get what's there, and ride back. The false bottom releases when you press the left rear corner down and slide the panel forward," she said immediately, because she had been prepared for this conversation, had been running it in her head since Aldous said the words, "Someone needs to go back." "The tin folder is red. Everything in it is labeled in my father's handwriting. Take the full folder, don't sort through it there." "How many men does Joseph keep at the ranch overnight?" 2 usually. Bunkhouse on the north end. The study is on the south side of the house." She paused. "Unless Joseph is there. If Joseph is there, there will be more." "I can manage 2, Ethan said. "You can't manage 5. Then I need to know before I ride in." He looked at Aldous. "Is there someone in this town you trust who can send word toward the Whitfield ranch and find out whether Joseph is home or riding?" Aldous thought for a moment. "There's a man named Greer who runs freight between here and the ranch country north of town. He's reliable, and he asks no questions provided you pay him for the questions he didn't ask. Can you reach him tonight?" I can reach him within the hour." "Do it," Ethan said. He looked at Nora. "I ride as soon as we know which problem I'm walking into." She wanted to argue. She had the argument assembled, she knew the ranch. She could help her ankle was manageable. And she looked at him, and he looked back at her. And they both knew the argument was wrong. Her value was in the courtroom, not the field. Her memory, her knowledge of the documents, her ability to sit across from Aldous for the next 4 hours and reconstruct every material fact into a legally coherent filing that was the real weapon. That was what Joseph had never seen coming, because Joseph had spent 6 years looking at her and seeing something decorative instead of something dangerous. "Come back," she said. Not a request, not sentiment, a statement of expectation. "I intend to," he said. Greer, it turned out, had a nephew who worked the Whitfield South pasture, and the nephew had been in Casper that afternoon and had information that cost Aldous $8 and changed everything. Joseph was not at the ranch. Joseph had left 2 days ago, heading south, taking 2 of his best men, and his direction of travel suggested Cheyenne. Not Casper. Cheyenne, where Tolliver's main operation sat, where the land-holding companies were chartered, where the money behind the fraud had its address. Joseph wasn't coming for Nora. Joseph was running to Tolliver to figure out what to do about the fact that Nora had gotten away. "He's scared," Nora said when Aldous relayed it. "He should be," Ethan said. "He doesn't scare easily," she said. "For him to go to Tolliver directly, he knows he's exposed," Ethan said. "He knows you saw the deed. He doesn't know what you remember or what you've done with it, but he knows enough to know he needs help." "Which means Tolliver is about to know everything Joseph knows," Aldous said. "And Tolliver has considerably more resources than Joseph." "Then we have tonight," Ethan said. He stood. "Who's at the ranch?" "Edward and one hand," Nora said. "Daniel was in Rollins last I knew. Looking for me, probably." Ethan nodded. He looked at her one more time. Steady, direct, no performance in it. And then he was out the door. She stood at the window and watched him mount the roan gelding and disappear into the dark of Front Street, and she held that watching for exactly 3 seconds before she turned back to the desk. "All right, Raymond," she said. "Tell me what you need." "Everything," he said. "In order, from the beginning." She sat down and she began. For 4 hours, Nora Whitfield talked, and Raymond Aldous wrote, and what they built together in that lamp-lit office was not dramatic in any visible way. No gunfire, no chases, no confrontations in canyon shadows. It was columns of figures and legal descriptions and witness names and dates and the careful architecture of a case that would stand up under scrutiny by men who were paid to find holes in things. It was the work her father had prepared her for without knowing exactly what he was preparing her for. And it was the work that Joseph had never once imagined she could do, and she did it with the focused precision of someone who had been waiting 6 years for the chance. Midnight came. She kept talking. 1 in the morning. Aldous' hand moved steadily across the paper. At 1:30 she stopped. Not because she'd run out of things to say, because she heard hoofbeats on Front Street, and they had a specific sound, fast approaching, then slowing, then stopping outside, and she had spent enough time near Ethan Cole to recognize the rhythm of the roan stride. She was at the door before he knocked. He was dusty and cold, and he had a small tin folder in his left hand, read exactly as she'd described it, and he held it out to her without preamble. She took it. She opened it. Her father's handwriting. The labels. The original land filing documents, the survey records, the boundary descriptions. Everything. Her hands were absolutely steady. "Edward was in the kitchen," Ethan said. "I went through the study window. He never knew I was there. And the folder was where you said it would be." He looked at her. "Your father hid things well. He trusted me to find them," she said. She handed the folder to Aldous without looking away from Ethan. "Is that enough?" Ethan asked Aldous. Aldous was already opening the folder, already reading, and the sound he made was small and satisfied and professional. "Combined with what Miss Whitfield has given me tonight." He said, "This is more than enough." He looked up. "I'll have the filing ready before the land office opens Monday. The federal petition will go to Cheyenne simultaneously." A pause. "Joseph Whitfield and Thomas Tolliver are going to have a very difficult season." Nora felt it then. Not triumph, because triumph was loud, and this wasn't loud. Something quieter than that. The specific piece of a thing done right that needed to be done. Like a ledger that had been carrying a false entry for too long and was finally cleanly corrected. She sat down. She hadn't realized until this moment how much she had been holding herself up from the inside, how much energy had gone into the constant maintenance of upright and moving and functional, and with the folder in Aldis's hands and the filing underway, and Ethan back in the room with her, some portion of that energy released itself, and she felt suddenly profoundly tired. "The ankle," Ethan said quietly. "It's fine." "Nora, it's—" She stopped. "It's less fine than I've been claiming," she said. "I know. I needed it to be fine. I know that too." He sat in the chair across from her close enough that she would have noticed 3 days ago and put more distance between them, and she didn't move. "It cannot be fine now," he said. "For a little while." She looked at him. At the dust on his coat, and the cold still coming off him, and the steadiness in his face that she had come to rely on in a way that she hadn't fully accounted for until this moment. "What happens after Monday?" she said. "Aldis files. The territorial office receives it. The federal office receives it. Joseph and Tolliver get notice that the deed is being challenged and the fraud is documented." He paused. "It's not instant. These things take time." "I know they take time," she said. "I mean, what happens to me? Where do I go while they take time?" He was quiet. "I can't go back to the ranch," she said. "Not while Joseph is free and Tolliver has resources. Not until the legal process has teeth." She looked at her hands. "I have no money. I have my father's gun and the clothes I'm wearing and a very good memory." "You have Aldis," Ethan said. "I know." "And you have—" He stopped. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she'd caught once before, brief and controlled, and this time he didn't hide it as quickly. Something behind the steadiness. Something that had been building across 3 days and 400 miles of hard riding and silence that had stopped being empty somewhere around the second campfire. "You have whatever I can offer," he said, "which at this moment is a roan gelding with new shoes and whatever's left in that leather pouch, and the ability to be in between you and a problem until the law gets where it's going." "That's a considerable offer," she said. "It's not charity," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know it isn't. And it's not—" He stopped again. Started differently. "I told you I've been looking for a reason to stop moving," he said. "I wasn't speaking hypothetically." The lamp between them burned low. Aldis was across the room with his pen and his papers, professionally oblivious in the particular way that kind men were when they understood that two people were saying something that needed to be said without an audience. "You just met me 4 days ago," she said. "I know. I'm in the middle of a land fraud case, and my brother is in Cheyenne talking to a man who has more money than either of us." "I know that too." "This is not a sensible time." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ask me again," she said. "After Monday. After the filing. After the law has what it needs." A pause. "Ask me when I'm not running." Something in his face settled. Not disappointment, the opposite. The expression of a man who has been given a specific thing to wait for and intends to wait for it. "All right," he said. Aldis set down his pen. "I hate to interrupt," he said in a tone that suggested he didn't hate it at all and had timed the interruption deliberately. "But I believe both of you should sleep. I'll finish the initial draft tonight. There are rooms above the office." He produced 2 keys from his desk drawer. Nora took hers. She stood on the bad ankle without showing it, and she said goodnight to Raymond Aldis, who had been her father's friend and had proven tonight that the word meant something. She walked to the door and stopped. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he said. She looked at him. "Most people say things," she said. He looked back. "I know," he said. She went upstairs, and downstairs, Raymond Aldis picked up his pen and kept writing. Building the legal structure of justice, brick by careful brick. While outside on the street of Casper, Wyoming, the cold October night pressed on toward dawn, and somewhere south in Cheyenne, Joseph Whitfield was walking into a meeting with Thomas Tolliver, about to discover that the sister he'd spent 6 years underestimating had spent the last 4 days building something he had no idea how to stop. The clock was running, and for the first time since she hit the ground outside her bedroom window, Nora Whitfield was the one with time on her side. Monday came in cold and clear. Raymond Aldis was at the Territorial Land Office when it opened at 8 in the morning, and Nora was beside him, and Ethan stood outside on the steps because the business inside was legal business, and his presence in the room would not help it and might complicate it. He waited, the way he waited, for most things still patient, watching the street with the particular alertness of a man who understood that the most dangerous moment in any operation was the one where you thought it was almost over. The filing took 40 minutes. When Aldis came out, he had the stamped receipt in his hand and the expression of a man who had just placed a very large bet on a very good hand. "It's done," he said. Territorial Office received. Federal petition goes to Cheyenne by courier this afternoon. The land transfer deed Joseph filed is now under formal challenge. He paused. The false notarization alone is sufficient to freeze the deed's legal force pending investigation. The forged signature and the Tolliver connection will take longer to fully adjudicate, but the immediate effect, the thing that matters right now, is that Holt Granger cannot take possession of that eastern pasture. Not today. Not until this is resolved. Nora stood on the steps of the land office in the cold October morning and felt the specific quality of a battle that had just shifted. "How long until Joseph knows?" she said. "The office will send formal notice to the deeds filing party within the week," Aldis said. "Joseph will receive it at the ranch or wherever he is." "He's in Cheyenne," Ethan said. "Then Tolliver will know simultaneously." Aldis looked at both of them over his spectacles. "Which brings me to the part of this conversation I have been preparing you for without quite saying it directly." He paused. "Tolliver is going to respond. He has attorneys. He has money. He will file counter-petitions and challenge the challenge and attempt to discredit the evidence. This is not over because we filed this morning. This is over when the investigation concludes and the land commissioner makes a determination." "How long?" Nora said. 6 months. Possibly a year." She absorbed that. "And in that time," she said, "Tolliver knows I'm the primary witness. He knows I have the original land records. He knows what I can testify to." "Yes," Aldis said, "which is why I want you out of Casper before the end of the week." "Where?" "I have a colleague in Laramie, a woman named Helen Marsh who runs a boarding house and has experience providing accommodation for individuals involved in legal proceedings." He looked at her carefully. "She's helped 3 women in similar circumstances in the past 2 years. She's discreet and she's safe." Nora looked at Ethan. Ethan was looking at the street. She knew that look. She had learned it over 4 days of close proximity, the particular set of his jaw when he was working through something he hadn't decided yet. She had also learned not to rush him through it, because the decisions he arrived at on his own tended to be better than the ones you pushed him toward. "Laramie," he said finally. "That's reasonable." "Will you come?" she asked, not assuming, asking. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, and that was that. They spent 2 more days in Casper, while Aldis prepared supporting documentation, and Nora worked through everything she could remember about the Haverstock sale dates, names, the approximate timeline of when the family had sold, and when the holding company had filed its claim. Aldis pulled public records and found what he was looking for. On the second afternoon, the Cheyenne Land Holding Company that had purchased the Haverstock claim was called the Western Territorial Development Trust, and its registered agent was a man named G.W. Pemberton, the same name as the fraudulent notary on Joseph's deed. Aldous set down the paper and looked at Nora and said very quietly, "This is considerably larger than one ranch." "How many ranches?" Ethan said. Aldous spread 4 documents across his desk. At minimum 4 properties acquired in the past 3 years through mechanisms that bear a strong resemblance to what was attempted with the Whitfield land. He looked at the papers. The Western Territorial Development Trust has been running a systematic acquisition operation across central Wyoming. They identify properties with complicated inheritance situations, elderly owners, multiple heirs, contested wills. They insert an instrument, in your case Joseph, who controls from the inside. They manufacture a legal transfer mechanism, and then they absorb the property. Nora felt the cold again, the deep kind. "My brothers didn't find Tolliver," she said. "What?" Ethan said. "I assumed Joseph had connected with Tolliver through business, through the land broker relationship. But if this is a system, if this is how they operate..." She looked at Aldous. "They found Joseph. Tolliver's people identified the Whitfield ranch as a target, and they found Joseph, and they gave him the scheme." Aldous was quiet for a moment. "That would be consistent with the pattern," he said. "Which means Joseph isn't just a perpetrator," she said. "He's also a tool." The room sat with that. She did not say it with sympathy. She said it with the precision of a woman who was thinking clearly about a legal situation, and the distinction mattered. What she felt about Joseph, in the privacy of her own chest, was more complicated than precision. It was the layered grief of a family that had broken along fault lines that had been there long before Tolliver and his scheme had found them. But that wasn't for this room. That was for later, when there was space for it. "Does it change the case?" Ethan asked Aldous. "It strengthens it enormously," Aldous said. "If Joseph can be demonstrated to be an unwitting instrument, or even a witting but minor one in a larger federal fraud scheme, the U.S. Land Commissioner will have motivation to pursue this far beyond the Whitfield Ranch." He looked at Nora. "It also means your testimony becomes valuable in a way that extends beyond your own property. You may be asked to testify in proceedings that go well past what we filed this morning." "I'll testify," she said. "It won't be comfortable." "Raymond," she said. "Very little has been comfortable lately. I've developed a tolerance." Something warmed in his expression, affection old and genuine, the kind a man has for the child of a friend he admired. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. She held that for a moment. Then she nodded once briefly and looked at the documents. "What do you need from me before we leave for Laramie?" she said. He needed 3 more hours of her memory, and she gave it. They left for Laramie on Wednesday morning. The ride was 2 days easier than the ride to Casper because they were not being followed, or if they were, whoever was following had learned from Edward's failure in Rawlins and was staying far enough back to be invisible. Ethan watched for it without mentioning it, which Nora had come to understand as his general approach to most threats. You watched. You prepared. You didn't speak it into existence if you didn't have to. The first day's ride was quiet, in the way their silences had become not empty, not awkward, but the particular quiet of 2 people who had said enough difficult things to each other that the spaces between words had become comfortable ground. It was Ethan who broke at midday with something she hadn't expected. "I had a wife," he said. "During the war. Before the war, technically. We married in '63 when I enlisted. She died in '64. Fever." Nora kept her eyes on the road ahead. She gave him the space of a long moment before she spoke, because that kind of sentence deserved space. "I'm sorry," she said. "We'd been married 11 months, he said. "I got the letter 3 weeks after she died. By the time I knew she was already..." He stopped. Started differently. "I've never told anyone that in one piece like that," he said. "Usually I say I had family, I lost them, and I closed the door." "You said both syllables to me," she said. "I did? Why?" He thought about it. "Because you asked me the right question at the right time," he said. "And because..." Another pause. "Because I told you I was looking for a reason to stop moving. I figured you should know what you were hearing when I said that." She let that land. She let it settle into the right place inside her, which took a moment because the right place was somewhere she hadn't opened in a long time. "What was her name?" she said. "Clara," he said. "She was lucky," Nora said, "to have someone who still carried her name like that after 13 years. He was quiet for a long time. "You're not like her," he said finally. "I want to say that clearly. You're not a replacement or a remedy for something. You're entirely yourself, and that's the thing that—" He stopped. "I'm not good at this." "You're doing fine," she said. "I don't want you to think—" "Ethan." She looked at him. "I know what you're saying, and I know what you're not saying, and I know the difference." A pause. "I'm not running anymore. I told you to ask me when I wasn't running." He looked at her. "So ask," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, and the road stretched out ahead of them, and the Wyoming sky was enormous and cold and clear in all directions. "Will you let me stay?" he said. "However this turns out, the case, the land, all of it, will you let me stay?" She looked at the road ahead for 3 full seconds. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. He looked forward. The roan found his stride beside the mare, and the two animals moved together with the easy synchrony of horses that had been traveling the same road long enough to know each other's rhythm. Nothing else was said about it. Nothing else needed to be. They reached Laramie on Friday evening, and Helen Marsh was exactly what Aldous had promised a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and the manner of someone who had made decisions about what mattered, and stopped apologizing for them sometime in the distant past. She looked at Nora, and then at Ethan, and then at Nora again, and said, "You'll want the corner room, quietest, best view of the street." She looked at Ethan. "There's a stable 2 blocks east that's decent. You look like a man who sleeps lighter when he knows where his horse is." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Dinner's at 7, she said. "Don't be late, I don't hold plates." She wasn't wrong about either thing. The corner room was quiet, and the view of the street was good, and Nora stood at the window that first evening and looked at Laramie and thought about what waiting felt like when you had something to wait for. She had spent 6 years waiting in the Whitfield house, and it had felt like suffocation, like being held in a shape that was wrong for her, pressed into it daily until she'd almost believed the shape was right. This was different. This waiting had direction. This waiting was pointed toward something she'd built herself, and no one could take it from her. Because the most important part of it lived in her head, in her memory, in the ledger-reading precision her father had given her, like a gift he'd known she would need. 3 weeks after they arrived in Laramie, the first letter came from Aldous. The U.S. Land Commissioner's Office had opened a formal investigation into the Western Territorial Development Trust. 4 ranch families in central Wyoming had been contacted as potential victims of the same scheme. The false notary, G.W. Pemberton, had been identified as Gerald Wallace Pemberton, a disbarred attorney from Denver who had been working as a document fabricator for Tolliver's operation for at least 2 years. 2 of Tolliver's associates had already retained counsel. Nora read the letter twice at Helen Marsh's kitchen table, while Ethan sat across from her with his coffee and said nothing. "It's real," she said. "It's actually happening." "It was always real," he said. "I know, but there's a difference between starting something and seeing it take hold." She set the letter down. "Aldous says the Whitfield deed challenge has been formally upheld pending investigation. The eastern pasture cannot be transferred. Holt Granger has withdrawn his interest." She paused. "He says the word is that Granger was told by Tolliver's lawyers to distance himself from the whole arrangement." "Granger was a buyer," Ethan said, "not a builder. When the thing he was buying became a legal liability, he walked." "Which tells me he knew it was dirty," she said. "Probably," Ethan said. "But knowing and proving are different jurisdictions." "Aldous will sort that out," she said. "He will." She looked at the letter again. "He says Joseph is cooperating." That was the sentence that had stopped her on the second reading. She had gone back to it 3 times, trying to hear it in the right way, trying to feel what she felt about it, without letting the feeling become something it wasn't supposed to be. Joseph is cooperating with the federal investigation, she said. Aldous says Tolliver's attorneys approached him in Cheyenne with a story that didn't hold together. And when Joseph realized he'd been used as a mechanism, when he understood the scope of what Tolliver was actually running, and how small and replaceable he was inside it, he made a decision. He flipped, Ethan said. Aldous calls it electing to provide material assistance to the government's investigation, she said. But yes. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? She thought about it seriously the way she thought about most things. I feel like justice is a more complicated machine than I expected, she said. And I feel like my father's land is going to be protected, which is what I ran for. She paused. And I feel like Joseph made a choice. Not a noble one, a practical one, the kind that keeps him out of a federal penitentiary. But it's the first choice I've seen him make in 6 years that wasn't about control. Another pause. I don't know what to do with that yet. You don't have to do anything with it right now, he said. I know. She looked at her hands. Daniel wrote to me, through Aldous. A real letter, not one Joseph drafted for him. He said he was sorry. He said he knew that wasn't enough. He said he'd walked to the wall that night because he was a coward, and he'd been a coward his whole life, and he didn't know how to be anything else. She stopped. He said he'd been sober for 3 weeks. Ethan said nothing. 3 weeks isn't much, she said. No? He agreed. But it's something. It is. She folded the letter. I'm not ready to write back, she said. But I'm also not, I haven't decided that I never will. She looked up. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, he said. A second letter came 2 weeks after the first, and this one changed the shape of everything. It was not from Aldous. It was written in a hand she knew. Small, cramped, the handwriting of a man who had learned to write late and never fully trusted his own letters. Daniel's hand. She read it alone in the corner room. Ethan had gone to see about the roan's winter shoes, and she sat by the window with the afternoon light and read what her brother had written, and she did not cry until the third paragraph, and then she cried briefly and without performance, and then she stopped because crying was not what the letter asked for. Daniel had gone back to the ranch. He had found the ranch hand who had been there the night Nora went through the window, a young man named Foss, 19 years old, who had been standing outside and had heard everything and had told no one because no one had asked him and because he was 19 and scared. Daniel had brought Foss to Aldous. Foss had given a sworn affidavit. The affidavit described in plain language what had happened in Nora Whitfield's room on the night of October 12, 1878. It named Joseph. It named Edward. It described what Foss had heard through the window, the voices, the sounds, the specific words Joseph had used when he told Edward to hold her down. It was a criminal matter now, separate from the civil fraud case. Aldous's letter, which arrived the same afternoon, explained the legal distinction in the careful language of a man who wanted her to understand her options before she made any decisions. She sat with both letters until Ethan came back. She handed them to him without speaking. He read them. He read them carefully, the way he did most things, fully, without rushing, without performing a reaction before he'd finished forming one. When he looked up, his face had the expression she had come to trust, most honest and steady, and entirely without calculation. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want Foss's affidavit to stand," she said. "I want it in the record. I want what happened that night to exist in a document somewhere that can't be erased." She paused. "Whether it becomes a prosecution, whether Joseph answers for it in criminal court, I want to talk to Aldous before I decide. Because I want to be sure I'm deciding from the right place, not from anger, not from fear, from—" she searched for the word, "from what's actually true." "That's the right way to think about it," he said. "Is it?" "It's the hardest way," he said. "So, probably." She almost laughed. Almost. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. I want to go back to the ranch." He looked at her. "Not now," she said. "Not until the investigation has moved far enough that it's safe. But I want to go back. It's my father's land. It's 400 acres that he built from nothing, and it belongs to me as much as it belongs to anyone still standing, and I'm not going to let Tolliver or Joseph or anyone else make me a refugee from my own inheritance." She held his gaze. "I'm going to go back and run it. Properly. With books I keep myself and decisions I make myself, and no one telling me what I can and can't know about my own property." Something happened in his face, something quiet and certain. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We." She heard it. He had said it deliberately, not slipping, not careless. We. The weight of it was not heavy. It was the opposite. The specific lightness of a thing correctly placed. "You're sure?" she said, not doubting, confirming. "I told you I was looking for a reason to stop," he said. "I found one. I found it standing in a creek bed in the dark, pointing a gun at me." He paused. "I'm not going anywhere, Nora, not unless you ask me to." "I'm not going to ask you to," she said. Spring came slowly to Wyoming the way it always did, grudgingly in fits with cold snapping back just when you thought it had given up. But it came. Aldis's work through the winter had been methodical and thorough. By March, the federal investigation into the Western Territorial Development Trust had expanded to 6 counties and 11 properties. By April, Thomas Tolliver had been indicted on 14 counts of land fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. By the first week of May, the Whitfield land challenge had been fully resolved in Nora's favor. Every acre of the original 400 returned to her legal control, including the eastern pasture that had been the centerpiece of the fraudulent deed. G.W. Pemberton pled guilty in exchange for testimony. Holt Granger paid a civil settlement and relocated to Colorado. Joseph, who had cooperated throughout the winter and provided the testimony that connected Tolliver directly to the deed scheme, received a suspended sentence and a 5-year prohibition from conducting any land transactions in the Wyoming Territory. He came to see her once in April, before the final resolution. He came alone on foot, left his horse at the gate, which she understood was deliberate. A man arriving on foot was a man who was not making a show of force. He stood in the yard of the small property she and Ethan had been using outside Laramie, and he looked older than she remembered. Not by years, by something else. Ethan was in the barn. He stayed there. He had offered to stay there, and she had said yes because this conversation was hers. "I don't know what to say to you," Joseph said. "I've been working on what to say for 3 months, and I don't know." "Then say the true thing," she said. "Whatever that is." He looked at the ground. He was a man who had spent his whole life looking at people with authority, and looking at the ground was costing him something visible. "I thought I was protecting the ranch," he said. "When Tolliver's man first came to me, he said the ranch was going to fail, said he had information about the market, about cattle prices, about what was coming. He said the only way to preserve any of it was to bring in outside capital, and that the marriage was the mechanism to make it legal." He paused. "I knew it wasn't right. I knew Papa wouldn't have done it. But I told myself it was practical and that you'd understand eventually, and that—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I told myself a lot of things." "I know," she said. "I put my boot on your back," he said. "I told Edward to hold you down." He looked up then, finally. And what was in his face was not comfortable to look at, not because it was hard or angry, but because it was naked in a way she had never seen Joseph be. "There's no story I can tell about that. There's no version of it that becomes something other than what it was." "No," she said. "There isn't." "Are you going to press charges?" he said. "Foss's affidavit." "I haven't decided," she said. "I'm going to talk to Raymond, and then I'm going to decide from the right place." She looked at him steadily. "But I want you to understand something, Joseph. Whatever I decide, it won't be because I'm afraid of you. And it won't be because I feel sorry for you. It'll be because it's what's true and right, and I'm the one who gets to determine that, not you." He nodded, very slowly. "You're like him," he said. "Papa, the way you think." "I know," she said. He made sure of it. Joseph left the way he came on foot back to the gate without looking back. She watched him go, and she felt the complicated grief of it. The thing that didn't have a clean name, the simultaneous truth that she had loved her brother, and that her brother had done an unforgivable thing, and that both of those facts would live alongside each other for the rest of her life, and neither one would cancel the other out. Ethan came out of the barn. He stood beside her and watched the gate where Joseph had disappeared. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I am." They went back to the Whitfield ranch in the second week of May, when the grass was coming up green on the eastern pasture, and the sky was the specific shade of blue that meant the hard season was finally done. The house was as she'd left it. Edward had kept it, which surprised her until she understood that keeping the house was the only thing Edward had known how to do. He'd been maintaining it through the winter, in the same spirit he'd maintained everything Joseph told him to, except Joseph was gone, and there was nothing left to maintain but the habit of it. Edward met them in the yard. He looked at Nora, and then at Ethan, and then at his boots. "I didn't know how to stop him," he said. "Joseph, I never learned how to stop him. I just did what he said and told myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. And he stopped. I know it doesn't." "Edward," Nora said. He looked up. "If you want to stay on and work the ranch," she said, "I need someone who can run the north fence line and manage the cattle inventory. And I need them to do it honestly with accurate records and to tell me the truth when I ask questions." He stared at her. "That's not forgiveness," she said. "That's a job offer. They're different things. But if you want to work for it, the other thing, the harder thing, this is how you start." Edward Whitfield, 25 years old, stood in the yard of his father's ranch and nodded in a way that had nothing performative in it. Just a man saying yes to the only road he could see. That evening, Nora sat at her father's desk with the ledger open in front of her and the lamp burning clear and steady, and she ran the numbers for the season. What they had, what they needed, what was possible if the eastern pasture was grazed properly and the herd rebuilt to the count her father had maintained in the last good year. The numbers were not easy, but they were honest, and honest numbers she could work with. Ethan came in from the barn and washed his hands at the basin and looked over her shoulder at the ledger. "Can it work?" he said. "Yes," she said. "It'll be tight the first year, but yes." He looked at the numbers. "You'll need a hand who knows cattle," he said. "I know someone," she said. He looked at her. She looked up at him. "You said you were looking for a reason to stop," she said. "This is a working ranch, Ethan. It's not romantic. It's early mornings and hard seasons, and years when the numbers scare you and you run them again anyway." She held his gaze. "But it's honest work, and it's real ground, and it's mine, and if you stay, it can be ours." He looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression she had catalogued across hundreds of miles, and a hard winter, the one that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same country. "I already unpacked my saddlebags," he said. She turned back to the ledger. He sat down across from her and was quiet in the way she had learned to love, fully present. No noise, just there, while she ran the numbers and the lamp held steady. And outside the Wyoming night came down over 400 acres of land that belonged to Nora Whitfield, because she had remembered every word of a fraudulent deed, and run through a window in the dark and refused at every single turning to be something that could be owned. Her father had given her a head for numbers and a knowledge of where the important papers were kept. She had done the rest herself, and that the doing of it, the particular hard-won freedom of a life, finally lived on her own terms, was something no deed forged or otherwise could ever take from her again.